been a minute since I've been on here and did a live, but just wanted to come on and talk about something. Should black culture be off limits for other groups? So this question came about because yesterday was Juneteenth, right? And for those of you who don't know what Juneteenth is, it's something pretty much where I think the last slaves in Texas were notified that slavery had ended 2 years ago, essentially in a nutshell. That's a quick little breakdown of it. And so I decided to Google a dashiki. I was thinking about getting a dashiki, and I Googled the dashiki. And when I Googled the dashiki, the first page that came up, first thing I saw, it was like a Wikipedia page. And it had an image on it. And it was an image of a white person wearing a dashiki. That was what was on the Wikipedia page. Right? That's what was on the Wikipedia page. And I was surprised. I was surprised. And I'm going to put a poll in the comment section. Is black culture off limits for other or two other groups? Let me know what you think. Is black culture off limits to other groups? So that question got brought about because I wanted to understand what was this about. So I saw the picture of the white person in the dashiki. I thought, that's weird. Why is that the first thing that pops up? And so I posted a video yesterday on my YouTube channel. You can go check it out. I posted a video on my YouTube channel pretty much stating, that I didn't agree with this. I thought that I asked the question, is it disrespectful for a white person to be wearing a dashiki? And video got a bunch of views. There's some comments in there, and there were some people that were upset with me. There are some people that were upset with me because I was saying that I think that white person wearing a dashiki was disrespectful to the culture. It was disrespectful to black culture. And I want to kind of paraphrase some of the comments that I was getting and get y'all's opinion on them. So some of the comments that I was getting were, well, black people, they wear white culture clothing, right? Black people dress like white people. And my counter argument to that was, one, I don't actually know. Someone said, well, black people wear suit and ties. That's white culture. That's them dressing white. How come they're able to do that, but white people shouldn't wear dashikis? And I sat with it and I thought, well, it's a little bit different. It's a little different because when a black person wears a suit and tie, they're usually wearing it in the context of trying to appear more professional or be more professional, right? I know plenty of black people that don't like wearing suit and ties, but they wear them because their job requires it, or they're an entrepreneur or something like that, and they want to feel like they'll be accepted. They want to look more professional and things like that. So I would argue, and if you're coming into the discussion right now, drop a comment. Please like the channel, subscribe if you find any value. But I would argue that black people wearing suit and ties, even if it does come from white culture, is different than white people wearing dashikis, because we have pretty much been told, not only as black people, but white people as well, that if you don't wear a suit and tie, you're not going to be perceived as professional, right? So I don't look at it the same way. In one situation, you're wearing a suit and tie because your job requires it, or because you want to be seen more professionally. In another one, where the white person is wearing a dashiki, there is no situation where you need to wear a dashiki to appear more professional and to make a living. That is just you going out wearing a dashiki, right? So I wanted to clarify that because that was a comment that kept coming up. Well, Well, black people participate in white culture. A lot of black people participate in white culture because we have to in order to survive. So a dashiki is pretty much just an African an African style of clothing. Google what a dashiki is. There are different designs on it, but it's an African style of clothing. So someone asked what a dashiki was in the comment section. So I wanted to open up the discussion. What do y'all think? Is black culture off limits to other groups? Should it be off limits to other groups? And is there a double standard there? Is there a double standard there? Because I do understand from the perspective of a white person that says, hey, you know, culture should just be culture and we should all share a culture. I have no malintention. I have no bad intentions by participating. Someone said, oh, hell no. Anyone should be able to wear it. So in the comment section, Shahid said, anyone should be able to wear a dashiki. And I would say you should be able to, but should you do it? Right? Should you wear a dashiki? If you're not a part of the black culture, should you wear a dashiki? We can't a lot when we talk about black folk, but we can say whatever we want about everyone else. I don't know, but culture shouldn't be taken advantage of. Someone said everyone should do as they wish. I agree. I agree that you should be able to wear a dashiki. I don't think it should be outlawed. I don't think there should be laws against it. I don't think you should lose your job. I don't think you should be canceled. I don't think you should be called a racist. Here's where I'm coming from when I say when I see a white person wearing a dashiki or participating in black culture, a lot of times it's cringe. A lot of times it's cringe because I feel like as a black person, we're not able to fully enjoy our culture. We're not able to fully enjoy what we create because one, it's capitalized on by other groups of people before we benefit from it at all, really. Two, in mainstream culture and when we walk out in the world, we're made fun of or we're thought of as less when we express ourselves through our culture, and when we participate in our culture, it's looked at as lesser than. And when other groups of people do it, it's looked at as better than. It's looked at as, less dangerous, all of those things. Someone says, well, is it cringe when a black person wears a polo shirt? So no, I don't think it's cringe when a black person wears a polo shirt because I don't consider a polo shirt a part of anyone's culture necessarily. That's a general, and this is what makes it weird. When we start talking about dashikis and we start talking about things that are very unique to a culture, people start acting like they don't understand what I'm talking about, right? They start acting like they don't understand what I'm talking about. So it's commonplace when people go to work or people are just out and about that they're wearing polo shirts. That's not tied to one culture. Okay, that's not tied to one culture. But what I will say is, if you're in the black culture, right, and in other cultures too, but maybe not. But if I show up like this, like I have somewhat of an athletic polo type shirt on, if I show up in this in some circles, I'll get laughed at. What are you wearing? Right? When I show up in a suit and tie in some places, what are you wearing? You're dressed like a white person. You're dressed like a white boy, right? So I understand from that perspective why it's seen as white, because we all know that professional is seen as white and other things are seen as not professional, right? That's just the way it is. But what I'm saying is that there are specific things that are unique to an individual culture that other people don't typically participate in. Not polos, not wearing a suit and tie or whatever like that, but things that are very unique to a culture to where you can, just by taking a look at them, you could probably guess what culture they're from if you're familiar with that culture and things such as that. That's what I'm talking about. It says, as if white people, we wear weaves, LOL. Let's talk about dreadlocks. It's for blacks only. So I do see with the dreadlocks, I used to have dreadlocks. I call them locks. But when I see that as well, it just makes me wonder. It makes me wonder, what is their intention in doing it? What is their intention? Now, am I saying that white people shouldn't wear dreadlocks? No. Am I saying that white people that wear them are racist? No. I know some white people that have dreadlocks. I don't really think anything of it. Someone said YouTube is censoring them. If YouTube is censoring you, you might be using cuss words. You might be saying that it's something that it finds offensive. It's not me. That's just what YouTube is doing. Someone said, rather than wearing a polo shirt being cringe, it should be cringe when a black person has a hair weave. Yes. Okay. Yes. I agree with that. And that's a hot take in the black community. Weave. Right? I think black women in particular, when black women wear weave, that is cringe to me. Even though it's accepted in the black community, even though a lot of black women do it, I think it's cringe. That's not your natural hair. And I'm not talking about the weave where you do it in its braids and you're looking like you're making it look like an African style. I'm talking about the weave where your hair is straightened, it's going down to your back, it's doing all this. That's not your hair, right? Where it's obviously not your. I'm talking about we've never seen your natural hair weave. That's what I'm talking about. I think that's cringe. I think that's cringe. And another thing is a lot of it has to do with psychology. And yes, someone said that was pushed upon black women historically. I do agree it was pushed upon them in a certain sense, but what I will say is I think now it's more of black women just don't want to do the work to wear their natural hair, and they just assume everyone thinks that they're going to be ugly or get judged for their natural hair. It said this guy will never talk about hair weaves. I'm not sure what you mean. I'm not sure if you're talking about me, but I'm talking about hair weaves. But yeah, I think that black women wearing weave, where it makes your hair look straight, is cringe. I think that's not your hair. You're trying to appropriate a different culture. You're trying to look like a white woman. Let's be real. Yes, correct. It takes time and work to cultivate a crown. And another thing is this. I agree with that. It does take work. But a lot of black women damage their hair. And then by the time they start to love their natural self, they don't want to go through the work and the embarrassment, if you will, and the look, the side eyes and stuff like that of taking care of their hair naturally, so they continue to wear artificial hair and not be natural. And so, yeah, I'll be fair and say that's cringe. I definitely think that it's cringe. Someone said it's laziness. We don't see Japanese people wearing samurai warrior outfits. Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure. I'm not really familiar with Japanese culture all like that, but they're not out wearing it. But what the main point that I'm getting on with this conversation is this. I don't think black people have had enough time to sit with our own culture and chisel things out of what's sacred and what's not. And whenever we come up with something, it's taken advantage of before we have the opportunity to enjoy it. It's like imagine you get a paycheck and everyone gets some before you, right? Which happens. Taxes, all your bills are gone, blah, blah. Everyone gets something from before you, but you don't get the benefit from your paycheck at all. You don't even get, you don't really get the benefit from it. And when you get paid, it seems like your money is less than other people's. That's how I view black culture. When we make something, it's viewed as ghetto, it's viewed as lesser than. But when other people put their hands in it, now all of a sudden it's acceptable. We need to gatekeep our culture. Someone said we need to gatekeep our culture. I agree. I do think we need to gatekeep our culture, for the simple fact is we're not profiting enough from it and we're not benefiting enough from it. And when other people are benefiting more off of black culture than we are, that's a problem. Someone says, should white culture be off limits to people of color? It depends on what you mean by white culture, and it depends on what you mean by off limits. Could you be more specific when you say, should white culture be off limits? Because if we're talking about going and getting a job somewhere, I don't really consider that white culture. And from my understanding, a lot of what's considered white culture is just an offshoot of other people's culture. It's not. There's very few things that white people originated, and I'm not. And I'm talking about white people in America. I'm not saying that to be mean. I really don't. When I think of what is white culture, clothes housing the world the way it is. I'm not sure when we say clothes, what do you mean by clothes? Are you saying suits and ties? Are you saying what? Someone said that clothes housing the world the way that it is. A lot, and this is the confusing thing I think people don't understand when they talk about white culture. A lot of the white culture, the things people say are white, were stolen from other groups of people and just masqueraded as white. Someone said, what I have on, that's white clothing. That's white clothing. Let me see. Let's see this white clothing. Let's see. I got a shirt on it. Let me see. Does this have a tag? This don't have a tag. Oh, I don't know. Oh, this was made in China. This was made in China. I don't know if y'all can see that, but this was made in China. So yeah, maybe white people paid someone in China to make this. I don't know who the owner or who owns this brand, if that's what you're talking about. If you're talking about this style of wear is only for white people, I don't see that. I see a lot of black people and other groups of people wearing polos and I guess golf tees and things like that. So I don't see this as white culture. If you have to go to a polo t-shirt to say that that's white culture, I guess I don't know what group of people made polos and what purpose did they make it for? Because we also have to understand this. There's a difference between white people making something to sell to the masses and a group of people just wearing that type of wear just because that's a part of their culture. Just wearing it, not making it to sell to a bunch of people, but understand that a lot of these cultures have been around a lot longer than these white cultures and what we're seeing today. Like these cultures have been around. Someone said, how can a race be a culture? Do you think you are more culturally similar to a white American or black Nambian? I mean, that's a good question. When I think of culture, I think that race and culture are tied together. I think that someone, for example, I have white family, right? We were raised for some part of my life in a similar environment, but that my white family member, they're experiencing that environment differently than me. And so even if we're raised in the same culture, I do believe that we experience that culture differently. I truly believe that. I think that we experience it differently. When my family member who's white with blue eyes, they go out and step into the world, they're viewed differently by society, by teachers, by cops, by potential employers and things like that. When they're around me and they're quote unquote acting black, it's viewed differently than if I were to do certain things. So I do think that race is tied with culture. I do think that the way that culture is expressed is dependent upon other factors outside of you just growing up in that area. Just like I told someone who's white that was born and raised in Compton is probably going to experience it differently than someone black born and raised in Compton. I think that race was a genie that never should have been let out the bottle. And once it did, it changed the world, and it's going to be hard to get that genie back in. And you experience culture differently, I think, dependent upon other factors like race. Yeah, culture and race is different. Someone said, we made them. Does that mean you shouldn't use them? No. just because you make something doesn't mean you shouldn't use them. And I'll give an example, right? There's, like I was saying earlier, there's a difference between a, a white person starting a company and making clothing for the masses, right? That's different than here's a piece of garment that is unique to this culture that was not made for the purposes of capitalism and selling to the masses so that everyone can participate in this. That's different. This is part of somebody's unique culture. And when you take it and when you take it and put it in its rightful context, you'll understand that the reason why Black people need to gatekeep their culture is because our culture was purposely stolen from us. And many of us are trying to find our way back to it. And in the process of finding our way back to it, many times it gets monopolized, it gets put out there and capitalized upon by other groups of people, and we're not able to enjoy it. So a white person making a shirt for the masses to wear is different than, for example, let's say a white person, and there's a white community where they have a tradition where they go fishing every June 1st. And it's a certain thing that they do in their culture that's unique to their culture. But then I come along and I'm a visitor and I see them doing it, and I take what they're doing and I start selling it to the masses, capitalizing on it, and they're no longer able to enjoy it the way they would, or it gets watered down and looked at through my lens and things like that. That's what I'm talking about, where it's specifically something for a culture that that culture is not able to enjoy. So it has to be put in its rightful context. Let me read some more comments. Someone said, you ain't from Africa. True, I'm not from Africa, but I do subscribe to the Pan-African ideology, which is that Africans in the diaspora meaning people, Black people who do not live on the continent, are also considered African. We may not know exactly where we come from Africa or where our family originated from, but we are considered African, and we believe that all African people are one people. And we believe that because that is the most effective way to actually make change in the world when it comes to Black people, because the struggle and plight of Black people is not just isolated to one continent, it's universal. And so having a connection to the homeland is definitely important. Yeah, someone said bastardized and commodified. Exactly. Someone said, you look like you from Atlanta. Nah. With that logic, perhaps you think we should stop discussing race and then it will magically stop happening. So yeah, someone said how you end racism is stop talking about it. I don't agree with that. I think that these are conversations that need to be had. Why don't we just live for the future and not the past? You know, I agree. I think we should live for the future and not the past. It's a nice saying, but I also think you need to take the past in consideration. But some of these things are still happening today. It's true today that Black people own very few institutions. We are in very little control of institutions, of politics. We're in very little control of the things that make change on a larger scale. And so in order to understand and put things in its rightful context and be able to look at your children and say things like, you need to shop Black, or you need to marry other Black people, or you need to gatekeep and protect your culture, you only are able to do that by putting it in its proper context and drawing off of the past and the present to present a future that is better than the past. And so I think context matters, and for us to be able to put everything in its rightful place, we have to draw on the past so that we can ultimately plan for a better future. Someone said, but y'all would rather talk about how racism isn't a thing. So there's that. Someone said, I'm from Africa and I don't see you as an African. Well, that's fine. There's a lot of people that wouldn't see themselves as African even in Africa, because they would see themselves as whatever tribe they're from. So that's fine. You're probably not a Pan-Africanist. And we don't all have to agree that, Africans in the diaspora are also considered African. But from a political perspective and from a unity perspective, it would benefit us more to view ourselves as one group. That way, if something goes down in Africa, for example, child slave labor in some of these cobalt mines and things like that, then Africans in the diaspora can show up and show out in whatever nation they're from to make sure it's not happening in Africa. If something's happening in America and Africa has valuable resources that America needs, then Africa can show up and show out and say, if you don't stop what you're doing to the Africans in America, then we're going to cut ties or we're going to financially punish you, etc., etc. So by saying you don't see me as an African, that only helps white supremacy. That only helps white power. So pick your poison. White society has always viewed us as the same, whether you're an African from the continent or on the continent. This connection going out. Let me see. Let me get on the Wi-Fi. Someone said unicorn doesn't work that way. He's American. I'm in Africa, Brick. Sorry, you're a European in Africa. The past needs to be repaired first. Then we can talk about how to move forward. Notice how he purposely avoids my comments. I'm trying to find your comments. There's a bunch of comments in here. Let me go back and see what your comment was. Now he's putting down capitalism. I'm not putting down capitalism. I'm simply saying, I don't know if you were talking to me, but I'm simply saying when I was talking about capitalism, that we live in a capitalist society and people take advantage of opportunities. And if there's a market, for example, for dashikis, people are going to take it. And if you're not from that culture, it can seem to the rest of the people that are in that culture that you're taking advantage of it before they're able to capitalize on it. All right, I'm going to read some more comments. This is more divisive rhetoric. You're only limiting and segregating your people with the rhetoric. I don't agree. Africa blacks are different than blacks in the rest of the world, but we look like brothers and sisters. Yeah, I think we're different. And I think we're different in some ways. And I think we're the same in other ways. But I do think it's important that we unify under something. We unify under something. You appear to be European and said you're African. And Jesse Lee Peterson and Candace Owens, just to name a few. I mean is nothing but false narrative. Okay, any questions? Anything y'all want me to touch on? It seemed like it's going down in the comment section. It's going down in the comment section. I want to ask y'all this, right? I want to ask y'all this. Do you feel comfortable participating in other people's culture? Do you feel comfortable participating in other people's culture? And would you not feel comfortable if they weren't really benefiting from it? Okay, we got some people said no. Yeah, and here's what I mean by participating, right? I love Mexican food. I'm not even going front. I love it. Smothered burritos, them fajitas, boy. Don't tell Dr. Umar. don't tell Dr. Umar. I love Mexican food. Now, do I think that I'm appropriating Mexican culture or that I'm diminishing Mexican culture by going and eating at a Mexican restaurant? No, I don't. And here's why. Most of the time when I go to a Mexican restaurant, I see Hispanic people working there. I see Mexican people working there. You know, I make a joke. If they don't speak English at that Mexican restaurant, I want to be there even more. That some of the best Mexican restaurants I go to, nobody in there speaks English. Or they got one person that speaks English and you call them to place your order and they say, hold up. Yeah, hold up. And then they go get the person that speaks English and place your order. I have no problem with it. I have no problem with it. And guess what? I'm supporting that business and I'm helping and I'm respectful of that culture, and I understand that I'm a visitor in that culture. And so they're benefiting because I'm spending money in their community. Now, would I feel would I feel a little conflicted if I went to a Mexican, if most of the Mexican restaurants in my area, I walk in and there's a bunch of black people and white people that are owning these restaurants and at the counters and stuff like that? Yeah, a little bit. Be like, are they taking advantage of Mexican culture? Why don't I see any Mexican people have with these restaurants in this area? Why don't I see any of this? Why don't I see any of that? I would start to feel like, let me go find a restaurant where they're Mexican, they're Hispanic, and that because that's their culture. And if they're not benefiting from their culture, to me, that's a problem. I don't like when other people benefit from other people's culture more than they are. Now, if there's a good mix, if there's most of the Mexican restaurants are owned and operated and stuff by Mexican people, cool. Little black one over here, little white one over there, I have no problem with it. But when it's exploited and the people whose it is don't get to enjoy it, I'm not with it. Someone said this stuff is wrong, but you blacks support every bit of it. When someone say you black, I for some reason I start to think that there's a little negativity towards black people going on. But okay, white, but I guess you are yellow like my mom. Who do you want to be flying in the airplane that you are in? Do you want to be diversity, equity, inclusion based, or should the most qualified people be flying the plane? Yeah, depends on what you mean by diversity, equity, inclusion, and what you mean by the most qualified. A lot of times the conversation gets mixed up to where anytime there's somebody who's non-white, or it's automatically considered diversity, equity, and inclusion. Um, Also, the idea that the best and most qualified are the ones getting hired. A lot of these people get hired because they have connections. A lot of these people get hired because they participated in some type of program, and the credential says one thing, but we don't really know their skills. We're not testing these people. Um, so it's like this whole narrative that the best and most qualified people are hired all the time. That's not necessarily true. Hiring managers may hire you based on how they feel. They may hire you based on confirmation bias. They may hire for a plethora of reasons. It's not always you have the most experience, you have this degree, you're hired, screw everyone else. If that was the case, why do they have interviews? Why do they have interviews with people? They're not just interviewing some people with the most experience and this type of degree. They interview a plethora of people. So uh, the best and most qualified is kind of uh, a misunderstood, and I think it's taken out of context because people get hired for plenty of reasons outside of just their experience and um, their degree or whatever. They get hired because they know how to talk and do interviews well. They know how to think on the spot. Someone said, I walk with our Tibetan community and practice Tibetan Buddhism, and they are welcoming to all others. Their country has been occupied since China invaded in 1959. They're in exile here. That's great. If you're investing in that culture and you respect that culture, then by all means. But I think that, with that example, they've had time to solidify what that means. They've had time to embrace their own culture and be with their own culture and benefit from their own culture. So if they're welcoming you, hey, do it. Do it up. But what I'm saying is that many times in the black community, we welcome people prematurely, and then we end up getting the short end of the stick because we're not able to properly benefit from it. Other people should not be benefiting more from black culture and things that we create more than we are. They just shouldn't. Let me read some more of these contents. Brick, I'm African. Also, all Africans are not dark skinned. In Egypt, they're almost white. That's true. Can say, how would you feel? Someone said if white people start calling each other, and I think that they spelled it, they made it seem like this is a derogatory term, and said if white people start calling each other crackers, and said only white people can say the word, how would you feel? I really wouldn't feel any type of way. It's a weird comparison. I know where you're going because you're trying to relate it to the N word. Black people never enslaved white people and then used that word as power over them and dehumanized white people in that way. And so it would definitely be different. I would be like, okay, well, how is this word harmful to you? What history do you have with black people where they had more power over you and they used this word and dehumanized you and didn't allow you to read and killed and sold you as property? So it's not really a apples to apples comparison. It would just feel like you're trying to stop somebody from saying something, and there wouldn't be the proper context as to why someone shouldn't say this. Um, Yes, and we will tell them that it is a term of endearment so they can't be against us. Again, this is what someone says, stop talking like you're making up stuff because you want to be the center of attention. And I'm a 9-year-old girl telling you a grown man. Someone said, what are, I think they're spelling this wrong. What disputing is that blacks who score lower on tests should not be able to get the job if they score lower on tests. Now, what I'm saying is that tests aren't the only way to determine someone's capabilities. A lot of tests are biased. A lot of tests don't actually test for the things that they say that they're testing for, and it's just a formality. The creators of the test have a certain vision in mind and a certain person in mind. But, throughout history, we've seen that tests can be wrong. The way we assess people can be wrong. Just like we used to think that you needed a degree for a lot of these jobs. You don't. These 4-year degrees, these master's degrees, these PhDs, the internet and the access to information that people have are showing that you don't actually need these degrees. You just need to know how to access information. You need to be able to know how to access information. So the way we test and things like that, especially when there's cultural bias and there's different ways to establish and understand someone's intelligence, yeah, we should be more cautious of tests and put them in their proper context. They shouldn't be the end all be all. Not saying don't have credentials or don't have qualifications or anything like that, but let's revisit what those qualifications actually mean, and let's not side sweep people who have been left out of the conversation. Someone said litmus test for becoming an airline pilot is about passing actual written tests and flight training, not how you perform in an interview. Okay, so you're taking one example of an airline, which, okay, I'm not saying don't have credentials. I'm not saying don't have any training. I'm not saying don't take tests at all. What I'm saying is that historically, people have been limited by these tests or by what people assume is the only way to do something. And that's the only point that I'm making. I'm not saying airlines shouldn't have tests and that anyone should just be able to walk on and be a pilot. What I'm saying is, if at a certain point, it's not about the test. It's about how well you can speak and articulate to people. It's about other factors. You were talking about, I think you were talking about the best and most qualified person. The best and most that someone doesn't have to be the best and most qualified to pass that test. The best and most qualified is the person that goes above and beyond the test. And what I'm saying is, you can go above and beyond something and still not get hired for something because you don't communicate in a certain way, or the hiring manager has a certain preference. Because you could take different hiring managers and they may pick different candidates. As a matter of fact, in many jobs, when you get hired, there's multiple people that are making the decision. And all of those people don't agree on the same person at times. They all have, this person may have hired this person if it was just up to them, or this person. So oftentimes it's someone's personal preference, not in lieu of not having any experience or anything like that. Just after you've met some basic qualifications, typically it comes down to other factors outside of just taking a test. Someone said, Ronald Robinson said, we fight to be connected to a place that sold us out, turned their back on us, never once declared war for us, and still haven't apologized for sending us here. Yeah, I mean, I do think that the African continent has some explaining to do. I do think that there are things that need to be mended. I do think that things need to be put in their proper context as well. I don't think that Africans on the continent knew exactly what was happening overseas, and many of them were in bad positions themselves. And since then, Africa has been exploited and exploited and exploited to the point to where it is very difficult for some of the otherwise richest nations to actually benefit from the resources that they have. So I don't think that Africans on the continent are doing better because some of them decide to sell other black people into slavery. I think that they got exploited as well. So it's a complex situation. Someone said, this is a clear and present example of black privilege. The fact is, if a black person is too incompetent to be able to pass the flight test and the written test, they shouldn't be able to get the job of airline pilot. I agree. If you can't pass the test and you can't do the things that are necessary to show you have competence, then you should not get the job. My point is that many times it comes down to other factors besides the test. Of course, pass the test, but many people pass those tests. Many people have the qualifications, but the idea that the best person out of that person is the one that's always chosen is just not correct. I'm saying once you pass a certain threshold and you have a pool of applicants that qualify, is not always the best and most qualified. It's whoever vibes with the hiring managers. Someone said, because of affirmative action, DEI type of black privilege policies, black kids get into colleges with lower SAT scores. Here's an interesting thing though. We trust the colleges when they say an SAT score is what matters in order to get into college, right? We blindly trust them. But when they say an SAT score is not all that matters, there's other factors that could matter as well. And as we move through time and space, we understand more and more of what those factors are. So we're going to give other people opportunities. Oh, we don't trust the college no more to be able to filter out who should be here and who shouldn't be there. You only have trust in SAT scores as a signal or a factor as to how successful someone would be because colleges told you that that was what mattered. But now that colleges are saying that's not what matters, or that's not the only thing that matters, we don't trust them anymore. So you trust them when they said your SAT score mattered, which even if you look at SAT scores, You have to study for those tests. A lot of people have private tutors. Some people have private tutors. You're studying for a test, right? That's very different than what you're actually capable of. Some people don't study for those tests. Some people don't have money for private tutors. Some people don't have access to some of the material on those tests. So it's not just uh, how well can you do on a test, because there are some people like me who are just good at taking tests, right? There are some people who are just good at taking tests, but you ask them to apply that knowledge, they can't. So if colleges are now saying there are other factors besides SAT scores that we want to take into consideration, why don't you trust them when they say that, and why do you trust them when it comes to the SAT scores? Because they made that up as well as a factor to getting into college. Someone said, I'm confident all the plane crashes in the past have been non-black pilots. So how can y'all say black ones are qualified? It seems like the job search is flawed now. Someone said, if there are truly blacks out there that can pass the test, why not just hire those blacks? So I think this is a genuine question. This is what I was saying earlier, the term or the phrase, the most qualified, the best and most qualified, is a little confusing for the general public, because the is one, right? The most qualified, that's one person. The most qualified person gets the job. Just because someone isn't the most qualified does not mean they can't do the job. Here's an example. If someone says that LeBron James is the best basketball player in the world, that doesn't mean that anyone that's not him can't play basketball. Let's just look at it from the NBA perspective. Let's not even say anyone else. Let's just look at NBA players. NBA players, no matter what position you're in the NBA, you are an elite athlete. Even if you sit on the bench, just to be a bench player in the NBA, you are still an elite athlete. So just because you're not LeBron James in the NBA does not mean that you don't know how to play basketball at all and that you're not qualified to play basketball. So that's the confusing part, is people think that because you didn't score as high as somebody else, that you're still not qualified. You can score high enough to be qualified. It's, did you score high enough? Now, if you can't even beat a high schooler in basketball or a middle schooler in basketball, maybe you shouldn't be in the NBA, right? So same thing with the pilots. Is it that they're not scoring high enough? Is that what it is? Is it that there's someone scored higher than them, but they still met a threshold and they got hired over this person? We need more data, I think, because right now it's just conversations where we're assuming people don't have these credentials or they're not qualified and things like that. Where's the data? Someone said, why would you need DEI if there were blacks that could pass the test? My understanding is that you would need DEI because maybe there's blacks that aren't getting access to being able to take the test, or they're in a pool of applicants and they take the test, but because they're more familiar with white applicants, or there's bias or something like that, prejudice, they may not choose the black applicant out of the pool. Like if you go on Indeed.com right now or LinkedIn and you start looking at jobs and looking to apply for jobs, there's hundreds of people applying for those jobs, thousands of people applying for those jobs, right? And so, if there's only one position, my understanding is that DEI says, hey, it's not just about lowering standards, as people say, but it's, hey, let's look at applicants who we haven't typically looked at before. So that could be, We say we need a master's degree, but do you actually need a master's degree? Because we see that a lot of black applicants only have a bachelor's degree. A lot of black applicants only have a bachelor's degree. Do we actually need this master's degree? Or is that a limitation that's been put out there that's stopping otherwise uh, qualified people from gaining access to it? And I'm coming up with this example off the top of my head. It may not fit apples to apples, but what I'm saying is that by opening up the job pool, it truly allows free market capitalism to take place. And do I think that someone shouldn't be qualified at all? No. But do I think that the qualifications that are set in place have been limited in a certain sense? Yeah, I do. Especially, someone said, do you want a surgeon who failed? Well, again, taking tests is not all that matters. Some people are just great test takers. There are some people who study hours for a test, hours, days, right? And when they go to take the test, they become so nervous that they forget what they studied. This is a real thing. And all I'm saying is taking tests is not the end all be all. People always want to relate it to surgeons. People always want to relate it to other things like that. And no one is saying don't have credentials. No one's saying don't have qualifications. Here's what DEI, in my opinion, is doing. It's saying, you know, there are certain barriers for people who are not white. There are certain barriers. And one of those barriers could be that we require a 1500 SAT score. And what they're going back and doing is saying, is there really a difference between someone who scores a 1500 and a 1200 or whatever? What is the difference? Well, we don't really see a difference. So maybe we'll let the people with the 1200 in and see how they do. That's my understanding of it. It's not, here's these people who are not qualified at all, could never do the job, and we're just going to let them in. It's that we've limited access by this arbitrary thing that we don't even know if it matters. And we're just going to say, hey, you get in based on this and you don't get in based on that. That's my understanding of DI, is that they're reassessing what they actually view as measuring how successful someone could be. Someone said the whole reason that we have DEI is because blacks can't pass those written tests and flight tests. So DEI is only for pilots. It's the same way with college admissions, and this guy just won't admit it. Here's an example of what I'm saying, right? For someone who's never spoken Spanish, never done work in Spanish, whatever, right? If you were to take a test in Spanish and not understand a single word on that test, someone may think that you're stupid. Someone who speaks Spanish and all this other stuff. But if that test was in English, you may do a lot better. And if there was a program that came along, and let's call it DEI, this DEI program or this DEI initiative is going to make it to where these tests are in English. Well, now it opens up access to people who otherwise would have been called stupid, who otherwise wouldn't have got in, because when they read the test, they don't understand the words. And so this is what can happen sometimes with DEI or with certain material is black people may not understand what's on the test because it's phrased in a certain way, and we don't know what that word means. Not because we're stupid, or we wouldn't know what that word means if we looked it up in the dictionary, but because in our everyday life and in our culture and community, we don't talk like that. We don't see those words. But when tests are made by white people and they're using words that white people are more familiar with, those tests may be easier. Or if the examples they give don't make sense to a black person because we are not familiar with that way of interaction or whatever, yeah, the test may be a little more difficult because it's culturally biased. So these are things that DEI addresses. Is this test culturally biased? Are there things in here that someone would have passed if it was phrased in a different way or if it was presented in a different way? You know, like the different examples and things like that. Like I remember when I was studying psychology in college and they were talking about the intelligence test, the IQ test. And it was saying that one of the questions on there was asking like what's missing in this picture? What's missing in this picture? And it was a picture of a girl skating on ice. She was skating on ice. And the thing that was missing was that there were no skid marks behind the girl's ice skates. That's what was missing. But someone who's never grown up around ice, someone who does not know what ice skating is, someone who's not familiar with that, they may not even know that that should be there. Someone who never grew up around snow, someone who grew up around snow and has been ice skating, they may be able to recognize that easier. So these are some of the things that DEI seeks to address. Does it get it perfect? Probably not. But that's my understanding of it, is that when people are saying lowering standards, it's being confused with making it more understandable or making it more familiar to people who it may otherwise have not been familiar to. So that's my understanding. Let me read some more of these comments. The highest test scores for children ever recorded are from 2 young black children. IQ tests are 9 boxes. 8 boxes are filled and the last empty. But if blacks score lower on the test, we are talking about airline pilots. Again, where's the data? Where is the data that shows? Because these are hypothetical, and this is what I'm talking about. These are hypothetical situations. Where is the data showing the test scores? Where is the data? And then you have to start asking yourself, right? Why would black people be scoring lower? Is it because they're black? Is that what we're saying? Are we saying that black people are scoring lower on tests simply because they're black? Are we saying that white people are just more inherently intelligent than black people? Because if that's what we're saying, then I disagree with that. Furthermore, it is wrong for airline pilot standards to be lowered for blacks, but Asians and whites and people from India and Middle Eastern and Hispanics have to pass the test. Okay, what is an example of lowering standards that you're seeing in mass? What you're saying that they're lowering the scores. Someone said, I'm Mexican and I failed every math test this year. Right. Is it because you're Mexican that you failed the math test? Like what are they? Because people keep using these airline pilots as an example. Where is the data sets that we can look at? The fact that it's not hypothetical, blacks say it's okay for testing standards to be lowered for them. I want to know where the data is. I want to know what the questions are. I want to know what the factors are for these tests. Because if we're going to sit here and say that, well, they failed the test. What we trusted the people to make the test to begin with. But now we don't trust them because they're doing what? Exactly. Like before you started hearing about DEI and things like that, did you know about the test? Did you understand the test? Do you know what goes into the test? Right? Why are we so caught up on pilots? During the Second Boer War, the British rounded up children and detained them in camps, which were overcrowded and black Africans. Yeah, there's a lot of travesties that have happened throughout history. If you are on the video watching right now, hit the like button real quick. Just show support for the channel. Subscribe if you have an opportunity. Someone said, I have never seen a black pilot. Me either. And this is the crazy thing. Is like, whenever black people start getting opportunities, it seems like everyone goes into a frenzy. We start getting opportunities, but no one wants to talk about all the opportunities that other groups of people have gotten. So, have you been in Africa? I don't know if this is aimed at me. I have never seen a black pilot. Have you been in Africa? All my pilots have been black. Yeah, they might be black if you're in Africa. I can see that. In the United States, I haven't seen too many black pilots, but I don't fly a lot, so. This is what airlines are already engaging in. I'll tell you what. I'm going to give threshold moment the benefit of the doubt, and I'm going to say that you are truly concerned that when you step on a plane and you have a black pilot, that black pilot is incompetent, that black pilot was likely a DEI hire that is not qualified to be on that plane, and that black pilot is pretty much a bum that just stepped off the street, walked into the cockpit, and is now flying a plane, and that if you're on that plane, you fear for your life. I'm going to give threshold, who's in the comment section, threshold moment the benefit of the doubt. He said that's not what threshold is saying. It sounds like that's what threshold is saying. It sounds like threshold is saying that they're lowering standards for black people. Yes, but did the black pilot get the job because he scored high on the test or because of DEI? It may be both. We don't know enough. Black kids got into college and they scored lower on the test. Okay, let's say that black kids got into college and they scored lower on the test. My next question is are there other factors besides the test score that matter when it comes to college? Because you're focusing on the test scores as if that's the end all be all. But there are plenty of factors that go into someone getting accepted into college outside of the test score. For example, I think a statistic I read was like close to 50% of PhD students don't finish their PhD. Now, if you're at the point to where you're a PhD student, you're getting into a PhD program, you've probably put in years of work in academia, and many of those people are qualified to get into the programs, but they don't end up finishing. So they may look at, it like, okay, this person got high test scores, but what other factors do we need to look at to determine whether they're going to stay in the program or not? Like, there are other things besides test scores that go into someone getting into college. He said the fact is that people that made the test made them for any kind of person, not just white people or people from India, etc. And if blacks can't pass the test, they shouldn't get the job. We are talking about people's lives here. So here's a point. When you say that those tests were made for any kind of person, you may be confusing intention with results. If I make a test that's only in English and I say that this is made for anybody, but someone taking the test only speaks Spanish, well, that's a barrier. Even if that wasn't my intention, was to exclude people who speak Spanish. Now, there's a barrier for someone who speaks Spanish. You could say, well, that person can learn how to speak English and then they'll be able to take a test. Okay, yeah, that's true. But then the factor that determines whether you can get in is not how smart you are, but how well you can learn English. So this is what I'm saying. The test scores, There's some bias there because the language in these tests could be language that people are not familiar with. It could be language that you don't use in your everyday life. But if you grow up if the tests are written by people who are white and they're using language that other white people would more readily understand, then that could be a factor in them passing versus other people not passing. But my thing is, if you're trusting the people who made the test and saying, well, they made the test, so let's trust them, why don't you trust them when they say, okay, now we're going to consider other factors besides who got the highest test score? Why do you trust them in one situation when it just so happens to benefit a lot more people who are white versus another situation where it may not? Why do you trust one over the other? That's my question. Because you blindly trust them when they make the test, but you don't know what went into making the test. You don't know any of those things, but you trust it. But you don't trust them over here. Were other people forced to not learn under the threat of death? I don't think so. Someone said, I'm watching this while cooking dinner and your comments keep coming up. Of course, it's hard for someone that doesn't speak that language. And this is what I'm saying. Yes, I know it's an extreme parallel to say with someone who speaks Spanish versus a black person who speaks English, but understand that there really is a gap in in language. There are some words that if you took a white person and you put them in the black community, and a black person could be speaking clear English to them, these are English words, that white person still wouldn't know what they were saying. Like there's slang that kids use that an adult may not understand. Now imagine that kid writing questions and using slang in there. Imagine a kid talking about, I was walking to the store the other day and, we was having a lit conversation. Someone may not understand what that means. But if the test is written by people who speak in a different way than you, even if it's the same language, you may not be able to answer the question properly because you don't even know what they're talking about. Because instead of them saying the cat walked across the street, they use a different word for walk that you ain't never heard of. And if you don't have the money to get the prep exam to teach you what that word means, and then because if you look at these SAT books, they tell you this question is likely going to be on the test, and people study the questions. They study the questions, and so then when it pops up on the test, they're familiar with it already. So it's not just about intelligence. It's about studying for a test. I've gotten many licenses before. I've gotten real estate licenses. I've passed tests. I've gotten insurance licenses. And one thing that was very familiar through it all is that after you take the test, most of the things that you had to learn for the test, you never even have to use in real life. It never comes up. It never comes. They just want you to know it for the test. And this is the problem with the testing system in America and probably other places, is that you study for these tests and then you never use the information afterwards. And so it factors down to who can take tests better. And there are just some people who are better off, who are better test takers. Someone said it's exactly what's going on because they aren't lowering the standards for Asians or people from India, or Middle Easterns or Hispanics, etc. It's not about what language should be on the test. The point is that the test use language that people from certain communities are exposed to. Yes. Easier to see a comment with caps and then stop reading. Exactly. The purposely does not read my full comments and just takes them apart and parses them. I'm reading, maybe I'm not saying it out loud to you, but I'm reading it and I'm interpreting what you're saying. So he's saying I'm not reading his full comment, but I'm reading it. Maybe I'm not speaking it out loud. Fact is that Asian kids and white kids and other kids like India and Hispanics actually scored higher on the SATs but were denied admissions to colleges. But if you know you're going to take the test and it's a language, then read up on real English. Yes, I agree. You can read up on real English. The point that I'm making is that even if you read up on real English, quote unquote, it's still going to be easier for somebody who doesn't have to study real English and try to cram and learn a new way of speaking. It's going to be easier for somebody who already speaks like that to understand it. You're going to be able to put pieces together and things like that in a way that someone who is studying for this isn't gonna. Like there are people there are people from other countries, right, who know the English language better than me. Who know the English, like they know the subject comes after the predicate or the whatever, like because they're studying the English language so that they can learn how to speak English. But they know by the books English, but they can't speak it as good as me because I grew up speaking English. But there are people that I've talked to from other countries who know things about the English language that I don't know. But because I've been speaking it so long, I do the things they're talking about unconsciously. I learned it at some point, but if you ask me to take a test on it right now, I would probably need to study up and things like that for the test. But in my everyday life, I don't know how I know that a comma comes after that. But I've used commas so much and things like that that I know a comma goes there. I don't know certain things. I'm not conscious of them, but I've used it so much that it's so familiar with me that I can put it familiar to me that I can put it together. And that's the point that I'm making is a lot of these tests are biased and they come down to familiarity. And when you have spoken a certain way and lived a certain way, and the people who are making the test are more aligned with your culture than other cultures, then when you have to study for those, it can be a barrier. That's the only point that I'm making. All right. Someone said maybe study some more. Yeah, that's an option. Someone said he is right that the public universities of California were found to be requiring lower scores for black students. He doesn't seem like someone who has been to college though. So I'm not sure if SSSSSS is talking about me when he says I'm someone who doesn't seem to have been to college though. Uh, Again, assumptions people make. I actually have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree, not from a DEI program, not because. Okay, no, I meant the user threshold. Okay, see, I don't know. These comments are coming in, and YouTube needs to change this because I'm on my phone, and so I can only see one or two comments at a time, and so y'all having a conversation up in here, and I'm trying to keep up with these comments. Said, now I'm disputing the test, but the Asians and Hispanics and the people from India don't dispute the test requirements, only the blacks. Well, um, just because they're not disputing anything, that doesn't mean that there's not a problem or that what I'm saying is not factual. When and honestly, here's another thing. The people from India and Asia, you're actually proving my point. When they're growing up, they are purposely focusing on learning those languages. They're purposely focusing on taking those tests because they understand that that's what's needed. But that doesn't mean that what I'm saying is invalid. That doesn't mean that those tests are not culturally biased. What is your point, Threshold? Is your point that black people are less intelligent inherently? Is your point that black people need to study more? What is your point? Whether it's college or airlines or anything else, black people require for test standards to be lowered for them so they can get the job. Why do you think that black people require it? What is your People from India and Asia have no problem with the language in the test, but blacks do. What is your point? What is your Why do you think that black people struggle with the test more? This is just black privilege. I would like to see more data on how many black pilots are actually getting through. I'd like to see more. I'll have to look up more data on the college and see. The fact is that Asians and people from India are not concerned with the race of the person that created the test. And these are things that you know how. Just because they're studying the test and things like that doesn't mean that they don't have their opinions about it. They could have their opinions about it. Another thing is that someone said still the same generation. That's true. Look, any other questions? I think we're kind of going in circles with threshold. Any other questions? If not, I'm gonna get off. Make sure you hit the like button, subscribe. Let me know this was a great conversation. Make sure you go check out other content on my page. The whole assertion is laughable because the fact is that Asians and Indians aren't concerned with the race of the person that created the test. Just because they're not concerned with it does not invalidate what I'm saying. So I just want to say that I respect that you let people discuss and don't ban people with different opinions. Yeah, I mean, and that's why I have this page, this YouTube channel, uh, is really to have open and honest conversations. Um, I do see from Thresh's perspective how it can be viewed as black people are getting special treatment and things like that. All I'm saying is that you know, we have to assess and understand the tests that are put in place and understand, are they biased? Maybe we need to question more about what is the purpose of these tests, because like I said, I've taken plenty of tests where after the test I've used nothing that was on the test for actual application in real life. Nothing. And even people you speak to that are in the industry, they say, I don't use that in my everyday life. I've never used that. You could talk to people that are doing the job that you want to do. And when it comes to some of these tests, they'll say, I don't know what that test is talking about. We don't do that. Or nah, that don't work, because these tests are biased. They're created by people, by companies, by we don't know. And so to just blindly say that this test is the end all be all, we need to analyze the test as well. Not saying the test got it wrong, but just if now the people that are saying, here's who can be a pilot and who can't be a pilot, if they're saying we need to reevaluate the testing system, why don't we trust that? Why did we trust them in the first place, but now we don't trust them now? Man, she getting special treatment. Made the test, but if the person can pass it, doesn't matter what the race they are. So we should just trust tests. We should just trust tests and not question it. We should just trust it and not question anything. The way that things are is the perfect way. There's no room for improvement. Say, yo, fool, what's up? What's up? All right, y'all. It's about to be 8 o'clock. I'm going to go eat some dinner. I'm going to go eat some DEI dinner. I'm going to go eat some DEI dinner right now. I'll see y'all later. Thank y'all for tuning in. Make sure you hit the like button, subscribe. Thank you for all the support, and I'll see you next time. Peace.